my name is Rin, and today I'm going to be rambling on how Star Wars, both its content and reception, reflect the society in which it was produced and how it serves as public memory. So before we get too far into this, let me give you a brief definition of public memory. So public memory is the collective understanding and sharing of a group's history. Entertainment is one form of this, as it preserves and memorializes a society at the time in which it was created, and media and entertainment is a huge portion of our modern society and reflects public memory at the time. So now that we have that kind of groundwork, let's get into Star Wars. The original trilogy. So Star Wars 1977, which was later renamed Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, was written in a space fairy tale style with a stark good and evil divide. The film was originally going to be titled The Adventures of Luke Starkiller, and would have featured the events of the entire original trilogy before it was later cut down and renamed. A New Hope pulls on Jewish and Christian constructs of corruption, a universe where good can become evil, where a fallen Jedi can turn on his people and help usher in an era of evil tyranny. Star Wars, the original trilogy, exhibits the call and seduction from the good to the bad, or, in terms of Star Wars, the call to the dark side. However, in the first film, Vader is originally one-dimensional. Anakin's story, the rise and fall that we know today, was practically non-existent. George Lucas was influenced by and incorporated real-world politics into his story. When Star Wars 1977, or A New Hope, was released, America was facing a post-Vietnam War world. America was also still grappling with World War II. And for Lucas, the Nazis offered a vision of evil so apparent that it still boggled the public mind, and it provided a historical precedent of good and evil. The hallmark stormtroopers of the original trilogy were directly pulled from the Nazi Sturmtruppen, also known in English as stormtroopers or the Imperial German Army. Star Wars, as this good and evil style fairy tale, is just another chapter of the two-dimensional way in which U.S. military participation was positively sold to audiences after World War II. However, the best part of Star Wars was the way that they took those 1950s and 60s tropes and manipulated them just enough to question the dominant pro-military narrative. In this post-Vietnam world, having the good guys be rebel guerrilla fighters was a very interesting statement to make at the time, and many parts of the story reflect the American Revolution's common narrative, but set in a post-Vietnam War era. It celebrates American revolutionary history while reminding viewers that technologically advanced empires need to be opposed. And with those technologically advanced empires, audiences are forced to confront America's own advanced technology used against North Vietnam. If Vietnam were set in space, Star Wars subtly reminds audiences that the United States would likely not be the protagonist or the hero of the story. Lucas uses the good and evil stark divide and twists that to imply a deeper question of what constitutes who is or can be good and evil, that things are not as always cut and dry as they seem. The content of the original trilogy reflects how filmmakers wanted to incorporate real-world politics in a way that wasn't in your face. The original trilogy reception shows audiences in the 70s and 80s giving generally positive reviews to the original trilogy. A New Hope was critically acclaimed for its ambitious cinematography. Audiences generally enjoyed the adventure fantasy-style story set in space, which hadn't really been done in film since the 1930s. While films were targeted towards younger audiences, viewers of all ages enjoyed them. While Empire Strikes Back, Episode 5, received more mixed reviews because viewers were surprised by its tonal shift, it was still generally given positive reviews. And Empire Strikes Back features one of the most iconic plot twists in film history, which keeps it front of mind for people. The trilogy as a whole and its receptions reflect a desire for fun yet introspective and beautiful space epics. Audiences' positive reviews of the original trilogy showcases the public's desire for engaging and beautiful storytelling, both in the plot and through its cinematography. And these films leave you thinking about the implications of what they're saying for long after you leave the theater. The Prequel Trilogy. From the very conception of the Star Wars franchise, George Lucas had planned for a prequel and sequel trilogy. He was largely waiting for the technology to catch up for his vision, and by the early 1990s, he felt that the CGI development had developed enough for him to be able to use it. The prequel trilogy focuses on the rise and fall of Anakin Skywalker, from his life from an enslaved young boy to the infamous Darth Vader. In addition to Anakin's story, the prequels also focused on the corruption of the Galactic Republic, genocide through the annihilation of the Jedi Order, and the rise of dictatorships through the Galactic Empire. The prequels definitely take a more nuanced and political approach to the Star Wars universe. The prequels draw heavily on Christian myth, such as Darth Maul, who is an enemy donned with red skin and horns, visually mirroring a devil-like figure. The prequels also draw heavily on the theme of prophecy. Anakin, as in one of the films is discussed by the Jedi Council, is believed to be the chosen one who will bring balance to the Force. He's born of a seemingly virgin birth, through the Force by his mother Shmi. However, unlike the Christian figure Jesus, Anakin also incorporates the myth of the former Archangel Lucifer's fall from grace. It isn't until the events of Return of the Jedi that the prophecy itself comes true. While the original trilogy is based in real politics, the prequels take it to a whole new level. Lucas modeled the corruption of the Galactic Republic off of the fall of the former Roman Republic and its formation of the Roman Empire. He also focused heavily on Emperor Palpatine. The events of the prequel mirror Adolf Hitler's elected position as Chancellor, even referring to Palpatine as Chancellor Palpatine, to his self-appointed role as Führer, or in this case Emperor for Palpatine, as well as drawing on nods to infamous dictators like Julius Caesar and Napoleon Bonaparte. The annihilation of the Jedi Order, also known as Order 66, or in universe as the Great Purge, reflects Hitler's attempts to execute individuals and consolidate his power, as well as incorporate elements of the Holocaust. The prequels reflect Lucas's desire to provide a more complex backstory for the infamous Darth Vader and force audiences to face how an empire could rise directly under our noses. The prequel trilogy was widely anticipated by audiences. Fans of the original trilogy had kept the franchise alive through what is now known as the Star Wars Extended Universe, particularly in the form of television shows and novels, which is now referred to as the non-canon Star Wars Legends. The prequels received extremely mixed reviews from the public that improved with each installment. Many viewers found The Phantom Menace, or Episode 1, to be far too political. Audiences who consider themselves particularly loyal to the original trilogy were not fans of some of the retconning that George Lucas did in the prequels, especially the retconning of the Force to being linked to microscopic bacteria known as midichlorians. Additionally, a lot of audiences were not a fan of the change in visual style as the film began to rely more on CGI. Not only that, they also hated characters like Jar Jar Binks, who they perceived as far too annoying for the film. However, despite its mixed reviews, the prequel trilogy has a retroactively improved reception due to installments like The Clone Wars and the Sequel Trilogy, although those are for two very different reasons. The negative reviews of the first two installments of the prequels are largely attributed to the expectations of what the prequels would have been or what they thought it could have been versus the form it actually took. It also relied on the drastic change in visual storytelling that people were not expecting and the more direct conversations surrounding galactic politics. The more positive reviews for Revenge of the Sith, or Episode 3, reflects audiences adjusting to this new visual and plot storytelling style and starting to see George Lucas's vision for the tragedy of Darth Vader fully come into itself. The animated projects. For me, the animated series Star Wars The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels are some of the best installations within the Star Wars universe. The Clone Wars takes place between Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, and it focuses on now Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, now Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Anakin's Padawan Ahsoka Tano as they work with the Clone Army during the Clone Wars. The series showcases Dave Filoni's understanding of George Lucas's overall vision, partially because he was largely involved in the show's creation. The Clone Wars show adds extra dimension to Anakin's character, which makes his fall to the dark side that much more impactful on audiences. Star Wars Rebels takes place after Episode 3, during the era of the Empire, and follows 6 characters. Kanan Jarrus, a former Jedi Padawan who survived Order 66 and changed his name and livelihood to survive. Hera Syndulla, the daughter of a revolutionary leader and a revolutionary leader herself, who saw the devastation of the Clone Wars firsthand. Chopper, a very aggressive but endearing astromech droid. Zeb, a Lasat who survived the genocide of his species. Sabine Wren, who is a Mandalorian who was ostracized after she joined the Imperial Army to help save her family, only to accidentally create the device that the Empire would use against the Mandalorians. And finally, and perceived as the main character, Ezra Bridger, a Force-sensitive orphan street rat who is picked up by the crew and trained by Kanan in the ways of the Force. Rebels also features Ahsoka, who became a revolutionary leader after leaving the Jedi Order in the Clone Wars. It shows the confrontation between Ahsoka and her former master Anakin Skywalker, now in the form of Darth Vader. Despite being kids' shows, the Clone Wars and Rebels both handle deep and complex themes, such as the ethical implications of cloning, war crimes, and grief, just to name a few. Both of these shows have received enormously positive reviews from audiences. Both the content and reviews showcase that these shows encapsulate what Star Wars is all about. It's about political dramas with moving, emotional storytelling and character development. And not only that, but this is what viewers want to see. Which makes the next section a bit jarring. The sequel trilogy. George Lucas planned to retire and decided to sell Lucasfilm to the Walt Disney Company in 2012 for $4.05 billion US. George Lucas had proposed story elements for the sequel trilogy, but they were largely discarded. Originally, Lucas wanted the sequels to incorporate the symbiotic relationship between the Jedi, the Force, and the midichlorians, which were referred to in Episode 1, Phantom Menace. He also wanted to address the Wills, which were all-powerful creatures mentioned in the earliest drafts of the first film, Star Wars Journal of the Wills. Lucas turned those ideas over to Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy, who were the president of Walt Disney and the co-president of Lucasfilm at the time, respectively, when he sold Lucasfilm. But most of the plot elements had been completely dismissed or reworked into what it is today. In order to save time, I won't go too into detail about the original plot of the sequels, but just know it featured vastly different plot elements than what was used. As they exist today, the sequels follow Rey, a scavenger from a desert planet, and the fight of the Resistance against the First Order, a military junta that emerged from the fall of the Galactic Empire. Rey learns the ways of the Force from Luke Skywalker and Leia Organa as she confronts Kylo Ren, or Ben Solo, the son of Leia Organa and Han Solo, and the grandson of Anakin Skywalker, who has fallen to the dark side while idolizing his grandfather. In my opinion, the sequel trilogy showcases that filmmakers did not understand the vision that Lucas had built out for the universe. Lucas's version of the sequels would have directly connected the prequels, originals, and the animated content into a seamless storyline that I personally think the sequels lack. Overall, while receiving box office success, the sequel trilogy has received mostly negative reviews from viewers, with each film receiving worse and worse reception. Many audiences, including myself, felt the potential for the sequel trilogy. Episode 7, The Force Awakens, set up a potential for a phenomenal installation of this epic saga, if not a little repetitive of A New Hope. However, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, was where audiences really began to split their opinions and reviews. The Last Jedi had switched directors from The Force Awakens, and while I think The Last Jedi tried to do something new with Star Wars, I don't believe it was the right time. The plot of The Last Jedi, while a decent movie, doesn't narratively align with the setup in Force Awakens. Additionally, audiences felt that the casting of the film was wasted and was perceived as using diversity incorrectly. Finn, the character who begins as a stormtrooper before deserting to join the Resistance, is played by John Boyega, a, at the time, rising but already accomplished Black British actor. Finn was set up to be a larger character than he ended up being. It is heavily implied throughout the entire trilogy that Finn is Force-sensitive, but it's never really addressed, and this plotline never really comes into fruition. Audiences felt that hiring but not utilizing John Boyega to his full potential was empty diversity. They hired a black actor just so they could use him in marketing, just to say that they had a black actor. Audiences felt similarly about Rose, a character played by Vietnamese-American actress Kelly Marie Tran, who was positioned as this strong, influential resistance fighter in The Last Jedi, but was almost entirely ignored in The Rise of Skywalker, Episode 9. Additionally, John Boyega's character Finn and Oscar Isaac's character Poe Dameron were set up to have this romantic relationship, but it was eventually scrapped. Isaac and Boyega themselves have discussed in interviews how they would have loved to explore that storyline, but were unable to. Audiences largely perceived this as queerbaiting. The sequels, unlike the prequels and originals, can't stand on their own. For the prequels and originals, you could watch either trilogy by itself and still understand, for the most part, what was happening. The sequels rely heavily on nostalgia factor and fan service. This has led viewers to retroactively perceive the sequels in a much more positive light in comparison to the sequels. Overall, the reception of the sequels reflect that audiences were unhappy with the generally empty storytelling that they provided. They felt it didn't align with the essence of previous Star Wars films and may have been used potentially as a cash grab, if not just an extra installment for installment's sake. The Disney era. In November 2019, Disney released its streaming platform Disney+. With the release of this platform, one of the hallmark opening shows was Season 1 of The Mandalorian. Since 2019, there have been several television installations within the Star Wars universe, with animated shows such as the much-anticipated final season of The Clone Wars, Tales of the Jedi, Bad Batch, and Tales of the Empire, along with live-action shows such as the second and third seasons of The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Andor, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, and the newest installment, Skeleton Crew, which is still coming out. These installments have received mixed reviews, but generally positive reviews in terms of the stories that are being told. With this era, we see what happens when people other than George Lucas, who deeply care about the universe, tell Star Wars stories. It further builds on the foundation of the universe by telling expansive stories that provide more context and a deeper understanding to Lucas's original vision through the lens of diverse storytellers. The public memory of Star Wars. Star Wars viewers, fans, and critics alike have an ever-changing perception of Star Wars media. However, what remains constant is that the mythos of Star Wars deeply reflects the world it was created in, whether it be deliberating the meaning of good and evil, how political and cultural narratives are interwoven with one another, or what it means to persevere and survive hardship while building community. And on that note, for better or worse, people often use Star Wars to connect with one another or position themselves within their community. Star Wars' audience has grown and changed dramatically since its first installation in 1977. The Star Wars fan base of old, generally perceived as white nerdy men, is no longer the sole enjoyer of Star Wars. Individuals from all different aspects of society now contribute to the community and enjoy the stories that are being told. And the Star Wars universe certainly isn't the first example of this in human history. For example, the Hebrew Bible, although not necessarily media, reflects the values and traditions of the ancient Jewish people. Older texts, like Judges and Kings, which we know were written earlier due to the language and grammar that it's in, are incorporated into what is known as the Deuteronomistic history, and is in essence more or less retconned into what is now known as the Hebrew Bible. Additionally, Greek mythology changed to reflect its growing audience. For example, cities had their own heroes that they celebrated. This was referred to as traditions of the polis. But as Greek influence and colonialism began to spread, these stories changed to incorporate newer additions to Greek society. And I think we as a society crave more Star Wars because it reflects our history in an entertaining and fantastical way. We can immortalize ourselves within this fictional world. These stories of interconnectedness, character development, and political drama calls to us because it's what we know. We, in essence, live Star Wars in our own mundane way, except maybe without the Force and lightsabers. So that is all for this video. Thank you so much for listening. If you stayed around the whole time, I hope you all enjoyed it. And if you have any additional thoughts or anything, leave them in the comments, and I'd love to continue the conversation.